Now to a News Nation exclusive investigation into a secret government experiment that was carried out in St. Louis. Residents tell us they still remember a mysterious fog. Children would run through it. Mothers would try and close their windows against it. For decades, they all had questions, and now we're seeking answers. The United States Army now admits that it sprayed a chemical that contained cadmium, a known carcinogen, on a neighborhood of more than 10,000 people. Critics say this was done with no warning and no consent. Well, tonight we return to the site of that demolished neighborhood and speak with former residents who believe the government turned them into human test subjects. Although the Army admits that the test happened, it is not admitted to harming the residents. News Nation's Natasha Zuvez investigates what was in the fog and why the truth may still be buried.
The fog drifted through the streets like a ghost.
That's exactly what it looked like, a thick fog.
It was summertime and it was hot. We would just run through it as fast as we could and try to just cool ourselves off. It stuck to you.
The spray was so foul as far as the odor. It made some of us have headaches, nausea, dizziness.
That's what I remember. It made me sick.
It wasn't the weather. It was an eerie smoke descending from rooftops, rolling from the backs of trucks.
Regular flatbed truck, but it had a big machine on the back. And it had a big nozzle that really sprayed a fog you couldn't even see through. It was that thick. And it really, we felt it as it would adhere to our skin. And as far as the guys on top of the buildings, they tried to portray them to us as maintenance workers. But we was like, what is a maintenance worker doing? And basically a hazmat suit. And they had masks and goggles.
In the 1950s and 60s, in secret, the U.S. Army sprayed zinc cadmium sulfide into the air of a St. Louis housing project, a largely black neighborhood called Pruitt-Igoe.
It was a lose-lose situation for us in Pruitt-Igoe. We were subjects. We were subjects.
They didn't ask for our permission. We didn't ask for them to spray us. My government used me like I was a guinea pig.
We're standing at where Pruitt-Igoe used to be here in St. Louis, and it's hard to believe more than 10,000 people used to live here. As we bring our drone up, you can see it's mostly just an empty lot now, overgrown with trees. This used to be filled with 33 high-rise buildings. It was all demolished in 1976. And according to the National Research Council, St. Louis was chosen for spraying experiments because it had similar characteristics to Soviet targets like Moscow in terms of population density and terrain and proximity to a river.
The government now admits to a secretive series of Cold War tests, including one dubbed Large Area Coverage. More than 30 tests conducted across the U.S. and Canada, spraying zinc cadmium sulfide from planes, rooftops, and vehicles to simulate how a biological attack might spread, all to prepare for potential warfare against the Soviets.
Many of us been in the military and had top secret clearances. We know how it works.
We have died for America. We have fought for America.
You are a veteran.
I am United States Air Force veteran.
Dr. Starks, you're a veteran as well,
Yes, I am. I'm an Air Force veteran also.
Is there a sense of betrayal here?
Definitely, definitely.
They want to know if those secret tests have anything to do with what they're observing with their own eyes.
I lost my two older siblings to cancer. I lost a brother last month.
I've been diagnosed recently with a rare form of lymphoma.
I had cancer of the left kidney, had partial removal of my left kidney.
News Nation reached out to the Army for answers. They provided a one-page response. It says the Army's own Center for Health Promotion and Preventive Medicine investigated in 1994 and found inhalation exposure would not pose a health risk. They also cite later corroborating reviews, including a 1997 review by the National Research Council. Perhaps they assumed we wouldn't read the NRC's 380-page report, but we did, and the Army's statement doesn't show the full picture. In that 1997 review, the National Research Council explicitly says repeated exposure to zinc cadmium sulfide can cause kidney or bone toxicity or lung cancer if levels are high enough. And they admitted they couldn't fully assess the risk. Why? because some Army records remain classified, it says, for national security reasons. More troubling, key Army exposure records were missing, and when the NRC asked the Army to supply them, the Army said it couldn't find them. Finally, the NRC considered conducting its own study, but concluded it wasn't feasible. In short, it did not test the site, collect samples, or test residents, and they didn't have access to all the data. Their review was based on what the Army gave them, and what the Army either could not find or withheld.
Maliciously. What in the world does that mean? Well, he says, he who winks maliciously causes grief, and a chattering fool comes to ruin. Now, a couple days ago, I talked about the chattering fool, the person who is so in love with the sound of their own voice that they never bother listening to what everybody says. And particularly, even worse, there are diabolical chattering fools who aren't people who just have diarrhea of the mouth. They're people who always want to be controlling the narrative. They always want the conversation to go where they want it to go because they have an agenda that they're trying to accomplish. And basically, it's a manipulative agenda to get you to say and to do what they want you to say and do. Well, so we understand the problem that, but he says, he who winks maliciously is something different. These people may not be very verbal. In fact, they may be people who are very silent, and yet the idea of the wink is that you're sending a signal that what you're doing is secretive. You're trying to secretly control the agenda. And there are some people who are very malicious. Malicious means that you're trying to cause harm to somebody else. And we have to ask ourselves, where does that maliciousness come from? Well, it's interesting because we find the scriptures tell us that it starts really with resentment. There are people who are very angry and resentful about their life and the way things have happened. And so that resentment has become a root of bitterness. And once resentment isn't addressed, and that's why it's important to address it, but you don't address it, it'll begin to send roots down into your soul, and you will become embittered. And you will be looking for a chance to express that embitterment. And the way you do that is by being malicious. In other words, you become angry or you become manipulative in order a way to hurt other people. There are some people I have known who actually sit around and think of ways in which they can punish other people. They want to get even, they want to settle the score, but they don't want to be found out. We call these kind of people sometimes velvet gloves, because on the surface they're very nice, they're very sweet, they're very charming. In fact, I remember my brother describing somebody to me in those terms. He said the person that we both knew very well, he said, very smart, very charming, and very dangerous. And that's a problem, that they could be very charming and very clever and insightful and could do all sorts of wonderful things so that people would draw them into their life and entrust themselves to them. But at some point, they're going to do harm to you. At some point, they're going to take advantage of you. And if they discover that there's nothing they can take from you, you have nothing to give them, then they just throw you aside. And in a way, what they've done is they've stolen your trust, your confidence, your love. They've taken advantage of your good-heartedness and used it in a very selfish way. And when they saw no value in it anymore, they just threw it off. And that's the idea of the person who winks maliciously. You know, some people are just loud and chattering, and they're very obvious. But there are other people who are very clever, and they're usually the people behind the scene. They're the people, they're not leading the march, they're at the back of the march, directing from behind. And so when you see some of these demonstrations on our streets and see these people with who look like they're not mentally healthy by all of their outward appearance, and they're holding signs and they're yelling and they're screaming and they're demanding, and we focus on them because they capture all our attention. They are the chattering fools. But there's a malicious winker who is back there. Oftentimes, these people actually have walkie-talkies. They're paid instigators. They go from city to city to run these riots, and their whole goal is disruption, because with disruption comes chaos. With chaos comes confusion. With confusion comes the collapse of order and society and stability. And then they like to rush in and try to take control.